This video is part 2 of Caro 2020. The first part we did discuss about what is Caro and what is the provisions of Companies Act 2013 which enables Caro to come into picture, and we also discussed that Caro basically has 4 paragraphs. Paragraph 1 talking about the applicability, commencement and short title, and then we also had like discussing the exceptions for applicability, what are the companies which are accepted and what are the conditions based on which each of those companies are accepted. And then we also looked into the fact as to what exactly does paragraph 2 talk about it, and this is something very new about Caro 2020 that is not there in Caro 2016, that is regarding consolidated financial statements. And then we in fact came down to paragraph 2 of Caro, which basically told that auditor has to report on paragraph 3 and paragraph 4. Paragraph 3 talks about 21 clauses as I told you previously, and paragraph 4 talks about the reasons for the qualifications that we make in paragraph 3. So in this video, we're going to do clause by clause analysis of all the 21 as per para 3. And before I go ahead, 2 important points. Point number 1, students who are writing examination in the month of May and June 2020, this Caro 2020 is not applicable and you will be writing examination based on Caro 2016. And regarding the practical approach, for the financial year 1920, Caro was applicable. However, because of COVID-19 outbreak, it has been postponed. That is, the applicability of Caro is been postponed, and Caro 2020 is applicable for the financial year 2021. Meaning for the year starting 1st of April 20, ending 31st of March 2021, when we give the statutory report in the next year, we would have to report it under Caro 2020. For now, it is Caro 2016 in force. Now, let us quickly get started. The first clause of Caro 2020 talks about property, plant and equipment and intangible assets. This is not a new clause. A clause corresponding to this was there in Caro 2016 also, that spoke about fixed assets. Here the nomenclature or the name is being changed. Reason is, previously when Caro 2016 was allowed, Ind AS was not taken into consideration. However, right now, according to Indian accounting standards, the new name that's given for fixed assets is property, plant and equipment. To adapt with such new change, the name has been changed. However, previously Accounting Standard 10, which spoke about fixed assets, now has been revised, and Accounting Standard 10 revised talks about property, plant and equipment. However, under Ind AS era, Ind AS 16 again talks about the entire term as property, plant and equipment. So we'll be using this name. And in the entire presentation, whenever I use the color red, it means that that is something new which was not there under Caro 2016 but has come into picture in Caro 2020. So according to this particular clause, there are 5 important points that we need to see, of which the first 2 were there in Caro 2016 also. Whereas the last 3 clauses are the new things that is there only in Caro 2020. The first thing is proper records. Now, what exactly is the term proper here? So the definition of the term proper is left to professional judgment. As a chartered accountant who's been appointed as a statutory auditor, we need to decide whether the records have been maintained are proper or not based on our skill, competence, knowledge and expertise. So this is left to professional judgment. However, the proper records criteria has been given, whether we need to record the situation of that particular asset and the description of the asset. Now, the next point is physical verification. So physically the assets are to be verified and we need to comment upon that. And the third one is title deed, as to in the document which gives the ownership of the asset, is the name of the company recorded or someone else's name is recorded. This is something new. And we also have something cool that is called as revaluation, whether during the year if the asset value has increased or the asset value has decreased, how do we go about as a statutory auditor? And the last and important one is Benami properties. Now we'll see each of them in detail. So the first one, proper records. So the judgment of proper records is left to professional judgment of the chartered accountant who's appointed as statutory auditor. We need to judge whether it is proper or not. However, the particulars regarding the quantity of the assets along with the situation where they are situated is to be disclosed. Meaning, if a company has 10 assets, 10 buildings, I need to tell what is the quantity of the buildings. They have 10 buildings and situation. One is in this city, the other was in that city. So we need to denote as to where exactly is this fixed asset situated. However, this will not arise regarding intangible assets because intangible assets will not have any physical place of appearance. So that's regarding the proper records. And the next point is regarding physical verification. Now, with respect to physical verification, now how often should the physical verification be made? Should it be made some 3 times a year? Should it be made just once a year? Should it be made once in 2 years? This decision is left to the discretion of the management, because management understands the industry better than the statutory auditor. So it is at the management's discretion that they will decide the time span at which the physical verification is to be made. Management will not decide whether the physical verification is to be made. Physical verification has to be made. Management will decide what is the time intervals at which this is particularly supposed to be made. As a statutory auditor, we'll just comment upon whether that management discretion is appropriate or not. Another important point is we need to check whether the physical verification is made during this year. If it is not made during this year, how will it affect our opinion is also supposed to be noted, and then we need to comment upon the same. So regarding physical verification, point number 1 that we need to see is whether it is done at reasonable intervals. So the reasonable intervals decision is made by the management. That's the reason you see a small blue circle there, which we'll discuss now. And the next thing is discrepancies, if any, has to be noted by auditor. We'll see. Regarding reasonable intervals with respect to physical verification, so it is decided by the management. However, considering the basic practice that we make, at least once in 3 years has to be made by the company. And the next thing is, if there is no physical verification in the current year, auditor has to comment upon the same. Next important point is regarding physical verification, we need to see discrepancies. If there is any discrepancies identified, how has the company dealt with those discrepancies in the books of accounts? Have they made sufficient adjustment? If they have made, good job. Congratulate them, comment upon it. If they have not made, again you need to comment upon that, saying that the discrepancies which are found in physical verification have not been rightly dealt. Obviously there will be discrepancies found, but how the company has disclosed them or adjusted them is the point to be considered here by the statutory auditor. The next point is title deed. It being in red says that this is something new that is there under CARO 2020, which was not there under CARO 2016. If as a company I purchase the asset, it should be registered in the company's name. Whereas if the company has registered these assets in a name other than that of a company, then this is a matter that is to be dealt in this particular clause. Now, this particular clause does not cover those cases where the company has taken the asset on lease, meaning the company is a lessee, and in this particular case, company just has a right to use the asset and company doesn't have the ownership of the asset. In this case, the title of the asset will not be in the name of the company, and it is okay. So that is not covered under this clause. So whenever we talk about the title deed clause, we're talking about all the assets that the company owns. This doesn't cover those assets which the company has taken on lease and which belongs to the company, but it will not be recorded. It will not be termed as the ownership will not be termed to be in the hands of the company because it's still under lease. So what is the items that will be covered in this? So this particular thing covers those items which are belonging to the company because of ownership, but not recorded in the names of the company. That is, the ownership is not, legal ownership is not there in the name of the company. It can be there in the name of a director, a promoter, or the person to whom employee is relative, or any other person to whom the company is very closely related. We need to disclose the entire thing in the format that is given under this particular clause. That is, firstly, the description of the asset. Second one, the gross carrying value of the asset. Thirdly, in whose name is it held? And the fourth point is that person the promoter, director, or the relative of the employee? And lastly, what is the period for which it is held in the name of a person other than the other than the company, and the reason why is it held? These are the items that we need to disclose regarding the title deed not being in the name of the company. Regarding the lease, we have something very cool that's come up because of Companies Amendment Act 2019. That is called as Ind AS 116 is being made applicable. Previously, we had Accounting Standard 19, which was dealing with lease. Later, over a period of time, this was transformed to Ind AS 17, which dealt with lease. Right now, we have something called as Ind AS 116. Ind AS 116 is more in line with IFRS. Now, I'll tell you the small difference between Ind AS 116, that is the new lease agreement, new lease arrangements, and the old kind of lease treatment. Whenever a company takes an asset on lease, that lease can be two types, an operating lease or a financing lease. If it is an operating lease, it is more or less like me taking on rent, and the ownership is with the lessor all by itself, and I will not record it in my books of accounts as an asset. I'll repeat, if the company takes an asset on lease, it can either be operating lease or finance lease. If it is operating lease, I will never become the owner and I will not record it in my books of accounts as an asset, me being lessee. This was under the old era. Under Ind AS era, Ind AS 116, which is in line with IFRS, I have taken the asset on operating lease, meaning I don't have an intention to take the asset at the end of useful life, but still I would have to record the asset in my books of accounts called as right to use the asset. This is something very cool in Ind AS 116, not very much in detail required in this part of discussion. Just to remember is what I told you, and we can just quickly move on to the next particular phase. So that is regarding revaluation. So if the asset has been revalued during the year, either upward or downward, both are included. Whether such revaluation is approved by the registered valuer. If it is approved by the registered valuer, whether we need to check whether it is registered. Firstly, if there is no revaluation upward or downward, cool, no comment. If it is revalued upward or downward, check if it is made under the authorization of the registered valuer. Secondly, whether such revaluation upward or downward, is it greater than or equal to 10% of the carrying amount. If it is greater than or equal to 10% of the carrying amount, we need to disclose it class wise. We need to disclose this class of assets revalued by 12%, this class of assets revalued by 12%, this class of assets by 10%. It can be upward revaluation or it can be downward revaluation. So 3 basic questions regarding revaluation. First one, is it revalued? If it is yes, then we need to check, is it revalued as per registered value given by registered valuer? If yes, then cool. If no, again comment there. And even if it is by the authorization of registered valuer, we need to check if such revaluation is greater than or equal to 10%. If yes, then we need to specifically mention class wise as to how much is the revaluation. And this is regarding property, plant and equipment, intangible assets, as well as RUA, that is right to use the asset, which will arise because of Ind AS 116. Me being a lessee, if you have taken an asset on operating lease, I have no intention of buying the asset, I don't have the ownership, but still I would have to record the asset in my books of accounts on the balance sheet asset side. The way in which I'll record is called as right to use the asset. Such right to use the asset, if it is revalued, then we need to look at this. Ind AS 116 is an amazing standard. Modification of lease is where we'll cover this revaluation. One of the very beautiful things, and I'll try to cover that in one of the videos coming soon. Yeah. So this is regarding revaluation. So then the next, this completely new, which was not there under CARO 2016. Then the last and important one, Benami property. This is something which I would have to talk about a little. Now, if you remember, the greatest thing, the unforgettable thing that has happened in the last 4-5 years in our country is demonetization. So when demonetization happened on November 8th, if I'm not wrong, in the same month, on the 1st of the month, there was a new act which came into picture called as Benami Property Act. But if you look in detail, Benami Property Act ages back to 1988. Benami Property Act is one such act which is very funny to talk about. Benami Property Act came into picture on 1988 with some 9 sections. But the rules regarding this particular act was not specified. Meaning, though the act is there from 1988, it is not in force. It hardly had 9 sections and rules were not actually pronounced. Rules were actually not notified. In the year 2011, when UPA government was in force, there was a talk about amending this particular act or releasing a new act. But however, the idea was put down saying a fact that what will we do about the last 12-13 years of, last few years of, 88, 12 plus 11. So 23 years. What do we do regarding properties which were dealt for last 23 years? And the act was dropped. However, when demonetization was planned, it was very much important that you notify this act and then come out with proper provisions in this act before you actually demonetize. So, the present NDA government first amended this act. There were previously 9 sections. They introduced around 60 to 63 sections newly, and then came out with this new version of this act on November 1st. And it was applicable from November 1st, 2016. And only after that, they went ahead with demonetization on 8th of November 2017. To be very precise, the word Benami just means that I have benefit of an asset, but I don't have the ownership. I keep the asset in someone's name, but I take the benefit. That's something that we usually see in every other Indian movie regarding politics, where the assets are held with someone's name, but the benefit is taken by someone else. So how to handle those particular cases? And this is prohibited. Holding assets in Benami names is prohibited. Now, regarding this Benami Prohibition Act, if there is any complaint that is raised against the company, or if there is any proceedings initiated by the company, then we need to see as to how exactly are those proceedings going. Regarding Benami Act, whether proceedings have been initiated and are there any cases pending against the company regarding Benami Transactions Prohibition Act 1988, and if yes, then check is whether certain disclosures are made regarding this by the company in the financial statements. So as a statutory auditor, we will check if Benami, under the Benami Act, is there any proceedings initiated in the current year, or in the previous years, if there is any proceedings initiated, And regarding this, is the company made sufficient disclosures against this in the books of accounts is only thing that we should check. So Benami Act is an amazing act that we can read sometime later. So right now I'll just rush to the second clause. So clause 1 is one of the very big clauses in our entire CARO. So other clauses will run little faster than what we just took now. So the second clause that we have is regarding inventory. Accounting Standard 2 also talks about inventory. So in this again, both the points, the first point, physical verification, is little similar to the one that we discussed in our clause 1, that is property, plant and equipment and intangible assets. Clause 2 inventory talks about physical verification. Again here, how often should the physical verification be made is at the discretion of the management. We only comment upon whether such frequency is it right or not. Secondly, if there is any discrepancies which have been identified, how has the company dealt with those in the books of accounts? Has it made rectification or has it made sufficient disclosure? And the next point is working capital loan. Working capital loan is something new that is coming under CARO 2020, which I'll discuss in detail. First we'll finish physical verification. Regarding physical verification, has it been done at reasonable intervals? Is the coverage and procedure followed by the management appropriate with the scale of the operations? Is the management's decision appropriate is what we should comment. We cannot tell the management, do it 4 times a year, do it in this entity. No. Once they do, we'll just comment whether the calls that they've taken is appropriate or not. And if the discrepancy that is arised is greater than or equal to 10%, same thing is what we discussed in fixed assets or clause 1, PPE and intangible assets. So we need to disclose it class wise. Yeah, each class of inventory has to be disclosed separately. Next, amazing one, working capital loans. This is to stop the scams that have been popping up in the recent times. In order to run the organization's day-to-day life structure, companies will take loans. These are not long-term loans, but these are short-term loans. These are taken to run the business on a day-to-day basis. These are called as working capital loans. These are usually taken on the basis of the current assets that is there in the company, based on the debtors, based on the stock, based on bills receivable, or any other assets which is there as a current asset, which will usually exhaust their life during the operating cycle of the organization. Whenever these are to be taken for the company, we give quarterly reports as to what exactly is the status of our current assets. Now, if I want to take a loan of 6 crores, I need to give sufficient security for 6 crores. I need to show my current assets for 6 crores or more. If not, I will not get loans. But what really happens is these loans are taken very often. So these loans basically require reports which are for a period lesser than a year. So what is usually possible is those reports which are given to the banks for the purpose of taking working capital loan might not be actual, might not be true. So then what will happen? NPA will be created. Banks will go bankrupt, as in the case of Yes Bank and PMC and quite a lot of other cases. So what we need to see is those quarterly reports what are given to the bank and the books of accounts of the company, are they same or not? In my books of accounts, fixed assets are some 20 crores. Sorry, current assets are 20 crores. But in order to take loan, the report that I have given to bank, it shows my current assets to be 30 crores. So I've inflated my current assets to take extra working capital loan. This is not okay. You need to comment upon this. So here the scope of the auditor has increased way beyond the usual limits. As a statutory auditor, I need to check whether the company has taken working capital loan. If the working capital loan is greater than 5 crores at any time during the year, not as on the balance sheet date, I need to check whether the quarterly reports what is filed, quarterly returns what is filed with the bank and the actual books of accounts figures, are they same or are they different? We need to comment upon them. From the banks and financial institutions on the basis of current assets as security, check if quarterly returns produced to the banks and books of accounts are in agreement or not. Whatever is produced to banks, whatever is there in the books of accounts, are they same or not? Or is the returns given to bank inflated? We need to check upon this particular fact. This is something new that is there only in CARO 2020. This is stop the corporate scams that is happening in the present times. Let's go to clause 3. Looks very big but very simple one, which talks about loans, investments, guarantees, securities and advances in the nature of loan. This is basically loans. I usually call it LIGS or LIGSA. We'll keep one. L is loan, I is investment, G is guarantee, securities and advance. Now, as this particular organization given loan or invested money in some other company, given guarantee to someone or advanced any money to any other organization, we need to comment upon this. No need to comment upon this if the principal operations of the company is all by itself lending. Meaning if the company is basically a banking company or an NBFC company. If company is a banking company, then CARO 2020 is not applicable. if the company is an NBFC, then this particular clause on which we need not comment. This is a clause on which we need not comment because the basic operations of the company is regarding lending. Now, are they prejudicial to the interest of the company? Now, has the company given loans to people from whom we might not recover the entire money? We might not recover the balances. This is something similar to in the case of PMC Bank, what it really did of giving the entire money to Housing Development Infrastructure Limited, HDIL. It ended up giving a lot of money, though it knew that there is no possibility of recovering that money, though it knew that it would going to become NPA. In fact, just a fact that 70% of the entire lendings made by PMC Bank was to HDIL, and 73% of the NPAs for PMC Bank was from HDIL. So it was like a company, it was like a bank floated exclusively to give loan to HDIL. And in fact, before the RBI slapped the notice, a week before that also 50 crores was lent by PMC Bank to HDIL. So this is to stop such things basically happening. Whether such loan given or investment made or guarantee or security given, is it prejudicial to the interest of the company? Next thing is, as the interest and repayment is made as stipulated, and if it is due for a period longer than 90 days, as the company necessitated certain action, you need to recover the repayment, you need to recover the principal as well as the interest at the time intervals it is told. If there is no recovery and the due period is greater than 90 months, has the company taken certain measures to recover? What are you doing to receive that money? Yeah, you cannot leave that money just like that. Or if you've given money at an interest rate which is not fair, that is prejudicial. Or if you've given money and you told that you pay it to me when I ask, meaning the terms are not made. It is like a demand deposit, like you basically receive the money when you demand for it. So if such is the case, then we need to actually report on the same. So see the last one, loans or advances repayable on demand or no specification on repayment term. And last but one point, this is an amazing point. Is there any extension, renewal or fresh loan? This is something very cool that I came across during my practical life during my articleship times. So we really had a client who basically had this outstanding. So when we do ledger verification, we usually see the aging schedule to understand how old is this particular loan given by the company. So if it is longer than 90 days, longer than 6 months, greater than 6 months will usually be reported separately. So we usually ask the client as to why exactly is this outstanding for greater than 12 months? What did you do? Why is this deposit outstanding for 5 years? What did you do? Why are you not initiated steps? We usually used to do this. So they come out with this technique where if a loan is outstanding for 5 years, as an auditor, we will check the aging schedule and we will question. So they used to pass one journal entry. Now if the debtor's name is A, they used to write the entry as A account debit to A account. So A account debit to A account, 5 lakh. So what would happen? The old loan is closed and it is converted into new loan. As the entry has same debit and same credit, it is very difficult to be identified. It is very difficult to catch the attention. Or even if it does, it doesn't basically, make sense to us at the first place. By doing this, what would happen? The aging schedule will switch from 5 years to 1 day, 2 day or less than a year. And the auditor will not raise a query on this. So to stop all this, in the CARO 2020, it has been very specifically made a point saying that if the old loan has been given extension for, or if it is renewed, or if it is converted to a new loan, we need to comment as an auditor saying that is it prejudicial to the interest of the company? Is it made in the best interest of the company or not? This is with regarding loans, interest, guarantee and securities. However, we have an important thing that we need to see regarding this. That is, we need to check whether this loan, interest, guarantee, security or advance, is it given to an entity which is our joint venture, subsidiary or associate, or is it given to an entity which is not a joint venture, subsidiary or associate? I repeat, regarding this LIGSA, we need to check whether is it given to subsidiary, joint venture or associate, or to a party other than our subsidiary, joint venture and associate. We need to say how much of it is to our subsidiary, how much of it is not to our subsidiary. That is regarding our clause 3. Let's now quickly go to clause 4. Clause 4 is something very new that's come up under CARO 2020 and it's very short also. It only talks about section 185 and section 186. Now, regarding section 185 and 186, this is read in continuation of clause 3, that is loans, investments, guarantees and securities. Though it is not part of our present discussion, I will try to throw some light on our section 185 and 186 in detail. Section 185, how to check if it is 185 covered section or not? We need to obtain MBP1 report that is filed by the company, and we also need to check into the register that is maintained under section 180. This is to understand those items which are covered under this particular clause. So once we obtain the transactions, we need to check whether these transactions are covered under 185 or not. Section 185 has certain exceptions, which is too much to discuss in our Caro discussion. Once you identify those transactions from MBP1 and register under section 180, check if these transactions are covered under exceptions. If these transactions are not covered under section exceptions to section 185, then this 185 is attracted, as the company complied with section 185 is what we need to comment upon. Next, regarding 186, this is something very nice. Whenever company has made any provision, any transactions under 186, we need to see whether is it in excess of 60% of paid up capital plus free reserves plus security premium, or 100% of security premium and free reserves, whichever is higher. If the transaction value exceeds this particular thing, then it has to be approved by a special resolution in the general meeting as per section 186. If the special resolution is not taken, in case it exceeds these particular limits, it leads to non-compliance, and they need to comment upon this. And to comply with section 186, we need to check couple of things. Firstly, we need to check whether the investment made by the company in its subsidiary, associate or joint venture, has it made in more than 2 layers, like A, B, C. A is invested in B, B is invested in C. This is one layer is B, second layer is C. Is it more than 2 layers? If it is more than 2 layers, we need to comment upon that. And then, is it fully disclosed by the company, number of layers that it owns, and indirectly how many companies are subsidiary to it, and the entire group information. And is there any board resolution approving this taken or not? And if the company has taken any loan from financial institution to beyond certain extent, financial institution will place certain conditions saying that if you need to do any transactions as notified by or covered by section 185, 186, you need to take my prior permission. If the company has not passed any board resolution, or if the company has not taken financial institutions permission, it will lead to non-compliance of section 186. And again, as an auditor, it is our responsibility to comment saying that company has not passed board resolution against this, or company has not taken financial institutions permission to do this particular activity, or the rate at which the interest is given, is it against the government yield, that is 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. A specific clause is being given in Caro, which says that the yield rate what is given, is it very low than the government yield, which is again prejudicial to the public interest. And as the registers been maintained properly as required under section 186. 185, 186 is too much to cover in this particular video. I have just given you the gist of 185, 186. As an auditor, we just need to comment upon whether the section 185 and 186 is being complied by the company or not. Let us now quickly go into clause 5. So this regarding 185 in respect of loans, interest, guarantees and securities, whether provisions of 185 and 186 have been complied or not. If not, we need to provide the details of non-compliance. Only this much is told in Caro. Those 2 circles what you see below is what I have put to make you understand 185, 186 to the extent it's required. Done. Detailed understanding, you would have to do it separately. Yeah. Next, we'll quickly go to clause 5 of our Caro 2020. Clause 5 talks about deposits. It's not a new clause. It was there under Caro 2016 also. But Caro 2016 exclusively covered deposits, whereas Caro 2020 covers those items which are deemed to be deposits. So Caro 2016 only covered deposits. Caro 2020 covers those items which are deposits as well as deemed to be deposits. With regard to this, we just need to see whether the company which is received deposits, has it complied with the orders given by RBI, and as it complied with the provisions of Companies Act 26/2013, and as it also complied with the orders issued by RBI, NCLT, court or any other tribunal in specific to this organization or in general to the group of organization. Basically, we need to check whether the company has followed RBI Act, Companies Act or any other order which has been issued by RBI, NCLT, tribunal or court regarding this particular deposits, and we need to comment upon the same. That's with regard to our clause 5. Next, let's quickly go to clause 6, cost records. Cost records are to be maintained by the company as per section 148 subsection 1. And remember, we are statutory auditors, we are not cost auditors of the company. So the cost records which are already maintained by the company, we need to, if it is applicable to the company, we need to take one confirmation from the board of directors asking, boss, is this clause applicable to you and are you following it? This has to be in written. Once we take that particular written representation from the board of directors saying that they have complied with the provisions of cost records as per section 148 subsection 1, we need to obtain the cost records And once we obtain the cost records, we cannot do detailed investigation into it, because our area of interest is entire business, statutory auditors, and we are not cost auditors of the company. We'll do just review of this and then basically make a comment upon the entire thing. Yeah, to see cost records, obtain written representation from the management about compliance, and then second point, obtain cost records. We will do a general review, not a detailed examination, and lastly, we'll report upon the same, whether the sufficiency of the records and have they been adequately maintained, correctly maintained, and have they complied with the entire provisions of the Act or not. That is regarding cost records. And the next one, statutory dues. Statutory dues regarding all the tax payments. So the tax payments usually included PF, ESI, service tax, VAT, entry tax, or excise duty, custom duty, any other surcharge and cess. But under CARO 2020, a new term is added, that is GST, our new bread and butter, something that is fetching lot of bread and butter to all the practicing chartered accountants out there. And this GST has been included because this is a new tax that is coming to picture after CARO 2016 was notified, but before CARO 2020 came into picture. CARO 2016 actually spoke about undisputed statutory dues. If there is any due that you're supposed to pay, maybe for PF or ESI or tax, indirect tax or direct tax, anything. If it is not disputed by you, it should be paid by you. At the end of the year, that is on the balance sheet date, if there is anything due pertaining to a period for greater than 6 months, meaning that money was due for more than 6 months and it is not paid, we were supposed to report on the same. This is there under CARO 2016. Undisputed statutory due outstanding for more than 6 months as on the balance sheet date has to be reported by the auditor in CARO. Whereas CARO 2020 increases the bandwidth of this particular clause, increasing the auditor's responsibility, adding up on a new point called as disputed statutory dues. Now, if there is any statutory due which you have not paid because there is a dispute, I cannot say that I'll ignore it. No. As a statutory auditor, our responsibility is to look into it, identify what exactly is the dispute, what is the forum with which the dispute is made. Is it with ITAT, that is Income Tax Appellate Tribunal? Is it with GST Tribunal? Is it with some custom duty tribunal? Or where is it questioned? Where is it disputed? And the amount of the money which is disputed has to be reported separate. However, very important point is mere representation is not considered as dispute. Dispute has to be genuine. So the new point is disputed statutory dues. Whenever there is dispute, we need to disclose the amount involved as well as the forum at which it is disputed, and mere representation is not considered as dispute. With regard to this, company would have already made the disclosure and auditor need to comment whether it has been properly disclosed or not in our CARO. This is regarding clause 7 which deals with statutory dues. Let us now quickly go to clause 8 which talks about unrecorded income. This is something which comes alongside with our demonetization scheme again. This is in specific reference to voluntary disclosure scheme that was made possible by the present government. Under the voluntary disclosure scheme, it was told that if you have any income which is not come under the tax bracket, basically calling the black money or the money which is not recorded as income, please disclose it and then pay 30% of it as tax. All penalties been waived off and you will not be put behind the, around 50% of it would be paid to the government and you would be given a clean sheet and you will not be prosecuted or put behind bars, was the scheme about. If any of the company has taken up this scheme and then disclosed any income under voluntary disclosure scheme, that amount is disclosed as income under income tax settlements. But such amount should also be recorded in books of accounts as income now, because it has become clean money now. So as a statutory auditor, if the company has taken up this voluntary disclosure scheme or by way of any other income tax settlement, if it has disclosed any income which was previously unrecorded, now that has become recorded, now that has passed to the tax bracket, should be correspondingly recorded in books of accounts. As an auditor, will check any money which is unrecorded previously now but now passed through tax bracket, has it been recorded in the books of accounts is the thing that we'll check. So whether transactions not recorded as income in books, that is now it is surrendered or disclosed under the income tax assessments. If it is yes, then check if such income has been duly recorded in books of accounts also. This was not there under CARO 2016, but it has now come under CARO 2020 because the voluntary disclosure scheme came very recently. So a lot of new things that has happened over a period of time have a great impact that has increased the bandwidth of our CARO. Let us now quickly go to the next one. Clause 9, which talks about borrowings. Borrowings was there under our CARO 2016 also, but number of paragraphs that is there in this particular clause has increased too much, has increased like by multiple folds under Caro 2020 era. So basically borrowings were spoken about only regarding failure to repay the money, that is the principal part. However, Caro 2020 includes the interest part also. What I can basically quote as an example here is, if you look into the case of Kingfisher, Vijay Mallya, who had taken loan from SBI, the repayment was due for 6,000 crores of principals. Along with interest, it came down to 9,000 crores. Even today, Vijay Mallya is seen as a person who's of like very bad nature. But if you see politically, Vijay Mallya has made it very clear in his recent tweet also, saying that he is ready to pay the principal, but is saying that is not willing to repay the interest part of it. Whereas his assets which are there in UK comes up to 15,000 crores, with which the SBI is interested, saying that it can recover the entire interest. So the bank is not stepping back, or bank is not ready to give up on 3,000 crores of interest. And if Vijay Mallya is ready to pay 6,000 crores of principal, but is not willing to pay the interest, though he has enough wealth in it. He says that I am not a culprit, I am just a failed businessman. And he also quotes the example of lot of previous organizations which were infused with government's funds and then made clear with and not basically forced into judiciary like him. So a couple of cases where 25,000 crores of bank loan was outstanding, including interest, but it was settled at a lower rate. And in fact, government infusing public funds into our, Air India. So that is again questioned by Vijay Mallya. So going ahead, borrowings. Regarding borrowings, if there is any default in repayment, including interest, that interest is something newly added, whether the that we need to comment upon. Next thing is, if banks or financial institutions has declared the company as a defaulter, then again we need to comment upon that. Vijay Mallya has been declared as a defaulter by bank, and then if any bank has announced it, then we need to comment upon that in our books of accounts. We need to check whether the company has disclosed it rightly, that we have been declared as willful defaulter, meaning though you have the money, you are not paying. Vijay Mallya has assets worth 15,000 crores in UK, but is not willing to pay 9,000 crores. Is willing to pay 6,000 crores, that is without interest. So he is a willful defaulter, meaning having the money but not being ready to pay. We need to report upon the same. Then if the company has taken short-term loans but used it for long-term purpose, the company has taken short-term loans but used it for long-term purpose, we need to comment upon the same. Something similar to the case of IL and FS, wherein money which was supposed to be used for long-term purpose could not be used for long-term purpose. So if you have taken short-term funds, it should be used for short-term. If it is used long-term, it should be used for long-term. Short-term funds used for long-term purpose will affect your working capital cycle, which will push you into cash losses. We'll discuss cash losses little later. If that is the thing, then we need to disclose the nature of the loan that is taken, and then the amount to the extent of which is used not for the purpose it was intended. Next, if there is any loans taken for subsidiaries, like the parent company takes the loan and then gives it to subsidiary, because the subsidiary company doesn't have sufficient guarantee or assets to take the loan. So if the holding company takes it, it is again prejudicial to the interest of the company. So again we need to comment upon that. And then if there is any loans taken by pledging the assets of the subsidiary. Now I have a company and I have a subsidiary. Instead of me taking the loan directly, because of lack of security, I pledge my subsidiary's assets and then take loan for my purpose. That is again loan of subsidiary used by the holding. Yeah, again that need to be commented upon by the statutory auditor. If you closely observe, the reporting requirements of the statutory auditors has gone to sky high. This is all because of the corporate scams that has come up in the last few years. So it's a very big ask from the professionals that we're going to come up, and let us brace our sleeve and then like tighten our shoelace and then go running, and then huge requirement from us. Yeah, let's all step up to it. The next thing, a little important thing regarding this particular borrowings, when there is any failure to repay the principal or the interest, we need to make certain disclosures. That is the nature of the borrowing, whether it is short term, long term, what term loan is it, from whom have we borrowed the money, how much of the money is due, how much of it is principal, how much of it is interest, what is the period for which it is due, and then lastly our remark upon the same based on how we've seen the organization. So name of the nature of the borrowing, the name of the lender, amount not paid, how much of it is principal, how much of it is interest, number of days for which it is due, and the auditor's report on this particular defaulty payment. This is regarding clause 9. Let us now quickly go to clause 10 of that. Clause 10 of this particular CARO talks about using of money raised by public issue, preferential allotment and private placement. Whenever the company has gone for public issue and then collected the money by way of initial public offer or further public offer. If the company does it for the first time, it's called as IPO. If the company does it after the first time, it's called as FPO. So this includes the debt instruments. This is where Subrata Roy, our Sahara Group's case, come into picture. Subrata Roy basically generated money by way of fully convertible debentures, and then this actually came out not when this happened. So some other companies one other company was floated, and they went for a public offer for that particular case. And in the red herring prospectus, which was supposed to be submitted to SEBI, they understood about the other previous Sahara Housing Development Company, and then one more company which had basically raised money by way of fully convertible debentures against the provisions of the act. Meaning, if it is for if the number of people who are involved in particular issue is more than 50, only ROC's permission is not sufficient. You would have to take SEBI's permission. But Sahara Group went ahead with issue of fully convertible debentures without taking ROC's permission, without taking SEBI's permission, meaning by mere ROC's permission. The amount of money involved in this case goes up to 20,000 crores, and this got highlighted later. Then the case went up to High Court. High Court told the proceedings against Sahara Group. Sahara Group took it up to Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Appellate Tribunal, Securities Appellate Tribunal had also come into picture, and then finally the Securities Appellate Tribunal's judgment was questioned in Supreme Court, and all the three times Sahara Group completely lost the case, and Subrata Roy was asked to pay the entire amount of 20,000 crores to SEBI with interest, so that SEBI will discharge it to the people who had raised this money by way of fully convertible debentures. But what really happened with Subrata Roy is he didn't give up the money, and then the government asked him to pay it in installments. So he basically paid 5,000 crores out of 20,000 crores. He paid 5,000 crores to SEBI, and then he was supposed to give the details of the people, and he sent the entire details in 27 trucks filled with papers which had the details of the people from whom this money was raised. And when the SEBI made the investigation, it was understood that all the details of the people that was given is fake. And when Subrata Roy was asked to pay the remaining 15,000 crores, he told that to those people they've settled the money straight away, and that is the reason they're basically not asking the money from SEBI. In fact, from SEBI around 1,400, 1,500 people only contested and asked for that money, and 500 crores was 5,000 crores was given instead of 20,000 crores. Out of those 5,000 crores, what was given by Sahara Group to SEBI, only 100 crores was claimed by people saying that it's my money. Remaining money was not claimed. Then the government understood that this is a very bigger scam than what we actually thought so. And the conclusion of the case was not basically given, and then Subrata Roy went to jail. Now he's out. Yeah, so let's put that on hold. So entire money might have been raised from a lot of money which was not disclosed as income from a lot of sources. As it is very difficult to run it through the financial system, it was run into the corporate channel without taking the permission of SEBI. Now, the present status is Sahara Group says that I am ready to give that entire money to you, but try and understand that I have already paid that money with interest to the person from whom I have taken back in 2012 only. And Sahara Group is hopeful about the fact that if SEBI cannot identify the people to whom it's supposed to be paid, it has to return that money back to Sahara Group. That is the present case. In fact, in spite of all this, Sahara Group is the second largest employer in the company, which basically gives employment to 14 lakh plus people in the country. Yeah, that was just for our information, and then let's now quickly get into clause 10 and then go ahead. So if there is any money that is raised by public issue, that is by IPO or FPO, including debt, whether it is being used for the purpose it was raised or is it being used for some other purpose is the question. How do we check it? When we make IPO or FPO, you would have basically mentioned the purpose in the prospectus. The prospectus purpose what is mentioned and the purpose for which those funds are used, is it same? Is what we need to check. If not, we need to comment upon the same. Or if there is any delay or default has to be reported. And then regarding preferential allotment, with respect to Sahara Group, what happened was preferential allotment. So in fact, Sahara Group in one of the proceedings also told that entire fully convertible debentures were allotted to people who are very closely held to the company. Employees, relatives, directors, relatives, promoters, relatives. So I need not take SEBI's permission is the reason what they give. But if you'd have to take SEBI's permission because the number of people are more than 50, you would have to take it. Now, if there is any private placement that is made, preferential allotment or private placement that is made, you need to comply with section 42 and section 62 of Companies Act 2013. Section 62 has come into picture exclusively after our Sahara Group's case. That is newly added in CARO 2020, which was not there in CARO 2016. This is regarding CARO 10. clause 10 of CARO 2020, meaning if there is any private placement or public issue or preferential allotment, as the money is being used for the purpose for it which it was intended to be raised, and if it is preferential allotment or private placement, as it complied with section 42 and section 62 of the Act. Next is clause 11. This is regarding fraud reporting. We know section 143 talks about the duties of an auditor, and under subsection 12 of section 143, if there is any fraud that is identified by the statutory auditor, I would have to report it within 60 days to central government in ADT 4. If such report is made, we need to comment upon that here, and if there is any fraud, we need to comment upon, report the amount, nature and whatever it is. And during the year, if there is any whistleblower, meaning any person who understands the organization has identified something that has gone wrong with the company and he blows the whistle, that is, he starts informing the company about this particular case. Now what exactly is the statutory auditor doing with regard to this? This we can quote the example of our INX Media, the Mukherjee family and our Karthi, the son of Chidambaram, was involved with. So INX Media was supposed to be a media company which was supposed to raise money. When it was supposed to raise money by foreign investments in the media industry, it is very regulated. FIPB is the national board which regulates, and you cannot collect to a greater extent foreign investments for media in our country. Whereas what really INX Media did was they raised to the extent of 5 crores, quoting it to be 5 crores, but they basically raised 300 crores of foreign investment. And however, when they were caught because of another daughter murder scam, and then they were put behind bars, in order to get into the good books of the government, she basically gave out the entire information about FIPB and Chidambaram's son Karthi being involved in the case, and they giving the maafi for the case of 300 crores that was basically raised without taking the permission from FIPB. Meaning, initially they took permission for 5 crores but raised 300 crores. But Financial Intelligence Unit identified this 300 crore transaction and then started questioning. Then the Minister for Finance was Chidambaram. So Karthi basically took the bribe, Karthi the son of Chidambaram, basically took the bribe from INX Media, and they basically gave out this entire approval for 300 crores post dated. Yeah, so that is something that we can give as an example for this particular case. Whereas if it is been identified, whistleblower, here when Mukherjees were in the jail, they basically confessed, they became approval, and then they told about the entire thing that we did. So if such whistleblower policy has been maintained, and one such person who is associated with the company comes up and then confesses or gives the information to the statutory auditor about the scam that is happening in the company, how is the statutory auditor dealing with this particular thing is to be read about in this particular clause 11. Clause 11 was previously there, but mention of 143 subsection 12 and mention of whistleblower policy was not there, which is now made under CARO 2020. Let us now go to clause 12. Talks about Nidhi companies. Regarding Nidhi companies, a statutory auditor should check whether that ratio of 1:20 of net owned funds is being addressed or not, whether more than 10% of the monies is being kept in unencumbered term deposits to settle the liabilities. So these two things are to be checked. That is the new Nidhi rules that has come up in 2014. So these two have to be checked, and we also should check whether the company has made repayment of the deposits along with interest on time. If not, we need to comment. So 3 important points. Number 1, net owned funds ratio of 1:20 is to be complied with, and then new Nidhi rules 2014 which came into picture, which asks 10% or more money to be kept in unencumbered securities to settle liabilities. And then the last one being deposits along with interest, whether it is repaid on time or not. All these things are to be commented upon. Regarding repayment of deposit and interest, it's a new clause that is come under CARO 2020, which was not there under CARO 2016. Now let's go to clause 13. Clause 13 talks about related party disclosures. So if there is any related party transactions which is covered under section 177 and section 188 along with accounting standard 18, has the company complied with these sections and has the company complied with the disclosure requirements. If it is not complied, then we need to tell that the company has not complied with this particular thing. We can also check with the standards on auditing 550 with regard to this, with regard to related party. So we need to check the compliance of section 177, section 178, disclosure requirements as per accounting standard 18, and we need to do the entire process, the entire thing keeping in mind our standards on auditing 550, which again talks about related parties. Let's go to clause 14, which talks about internal audit. This is a new clause which is there under CARO 2020. Internal audit, the scope of the internal audit, the coverage of the internal audit is not determined by the statutory auditor. It is determined by the management. As a statutory auditor, we need to comment upon it after considering the facts that whether the internal audit whatever is made, is it sufficient? Is it in line with the scale of operations? Is it efficient enough? And the next thing that as a statutory auditor I need to talk about is, have I used the information from the internal audit report? Meaning, as the statutory auditor, use the internal auditor's reports is the two things that we need to comment upon. Point number one, size and nature of the business. Is the internal audit okay with that? Second one is, internal auditor's report, has it been used by the statutory auditor? This is regarding clause 14. Now let's go to clause 15. Now this clause 14 was not there in CARO 2016, but it is part of our Companies Act 2013. Yeah. Now, non-cash transactions with directors. Whether the company has entered into any non-cash transactions with directors or persons connected with him. Very important point. Whether it is with the directors or the persons connected with him. Now, who are these persons connected with him? So, one thing which is not evident is, I am a company. If I have a holding company or a subsidiary company, directors of the holding company, directors of the subsidiary company are also covered in this. If I have a joint venture or an associate, directors in that company are also covered in this. So basically it is non-cash transactions with directors of my company, directors of my holding company, directors of my subsidiary, joint venture or associate or any other person related to it. Yeah. So if there is any non-cash transactions with these people who are director of holding, subsidiary, my company, joint venture, associate or persons related, we need to check the compliance of section 192. What exactly is 192? I'll just cover the small part of it because section 192 or whatever is there, section 192 has to be dealt separately and it is not part of CARO 20. That section 185 there in this circle is been typed wrongly. It's section 182. Section 182 talks about prohibition. Basically, section 182 prohibits non-cash transactions with directors. It doesn't support for it. However, there are certain exceptions. There are certain means by which it is actually allowed. Usually, Companies Act talks about it. It says this is not possible. However, if you want to do this, you need to comply with this. So basically, section 192, section 192 prohibits director or person connected to acquire an asset for a consideration other than cash or vice versa. Meaning, there is a director who acquires the asset from the company for a non-cash transaction. This is prohibited. Or company acquires the asset from a director for a non-cash transaction. This is again not allowed. That is like a barter. You give one asset, I will give one asset. Yeah, either from company to director or director to company or related party, it is prohibited unless this is approved by a resolution in the general meeting, not mentioned as a special resolution. So ordinary resolution will do. And such value that is agreed upon should be approved by the registered valuer. So point number one, there should be resolution in the general meeting. Point number two is it should be the value that is a value adopted in the resolution in the general meeting. It should be basically the value given by the registered valuer. If these two things are being complied, then the transaction is not prohibited. If not, such non-cash transaction with director or a person or that certain persons is prohibited under section 192 of that. So this with respect to clause 15. Let us now go to clause 16 of that. Clause 16 of this particular CARO. So clause 16 talks about regulation under section 45 IA of RBI. Now whether the company is registered or is supposed to be registered, is required to be registered under section 45A, we should check. If it is exempt under this section or if it is not registered because it is not covered, we need to check whether is it covered under this section or not. If it is covered, is it registered? If it is exempted, is it actually exempted? We need to check the applicability of these provisions. And if in case the company is a CIC, that is core investment company, or it is exempted from this clause, again we need to check the applicability of this CIC provisions on the company and then comment upon this. And if in the group, if there is more than one CIC company, if my holding is a CIC or if my subsidiary is a CIC, then again I need to comment upon these details. So as a statutory auditor regarding clause 16, we need to check whether section 45 IA is applicable, whether the company is covered under this, whether the company is exempted under this, whether the company is supposed to register or not supposed to be registered. Whatever the company claims, we need to check whether the company's claim is correct or not. Nextly, we need to check whether the company is a core investment company or not. If it is a core investment company, has it complied with the provisions of the Act, RBI Act? If it is not a core investment company, is there any other core investment company in the group? If yes, then we need to comment upon that aspect also relating to what is the impact of that company in the group on this company. Now, let's quickly go to clause 17. Clause 17 talks about cash losses. This happened with our Kingfisher all by itself. Kingfisher basically had cash losses for consecutive 3-4 years, 2015, 16, 17, 2013, 14, 15, 16. Our SBI basically didn't claim money for 2 years in spite of the fact that they had losses. Firstly, the question is, how did SBI give 6,000 crores of loan to Vijay Mallya for Kingfisher? When they gave the loan, they basically gave the loan based on the value of the brand that was held then. But the value of the brand started deteriorating, and the repayment was not made by Kingfisher, and they kept quiet for 2 good years, and they later filed the case in the Karnataka High Court. So if there is any cash losses, we need to report it very clearly, saying that the company is having cash losses. And then if the cash loss is there in the previous year, preceding financial, again that need to be reported by an auditor. This is a new clause which has come up in Caro 2020, which was not there in Caro 2016. So whether the company has incurred any cash losses in the financial year and in the immediately preceding financial year, if the answer is yes, then state the amount of cash losses that is supposed to be made by the statutory auditor. Yeah. And regarding cash losses of the previous years, for which I am not the auditor, I can rely upon the audit reports of the previous financial year. That is the previous auditor, whatever the reports he has made, I can rely upon that and I can take the figures from that particular report. This is regarding clause 17. Let's quickly go to clause 18, talking about auditor's resignation. If I've been appointed as an auditor of a company, and then I find something fishy in the company, I come across certain facts which might make me give a disclaimer opinion or an adverse opinion or a qualified opinion. The first option I have is, I can resign from that entire audit assignment. If I resign, there is a new person who is going to be appointed as the auditor. Now that person might take up the entire audit without knowing the entire case, and he might fall into shit. So as a professional, we need to help out each other, and I need to tell that new appointed auditor as to what are the qualifications, what are the objections based on which he should not take the audit report, he should not take up the audit. Or if I was the auditor of the company for the last 2 years and have not been paid my audit fees, then I can resign from the current audit. When I do that, the new auditor cannot be appointed. The new auditor who has been appointed, he cannot take up the assignment. If he takes it up, it is basically not doing any amount of compassion to the previous auditor. So the newly appointed auditor has to communicate to the previous auditor asking as to what are the basis objections on which I am not supposed to take up the audit. So this communication is very important. It is specified in Companies Act 2013 also. It is the duty of the incoming auditor to communicate to the previous auditor as to what are the basis on which you are not supposed to take the audit. That is again made very evident and very important by mentioning it in clause 18 of Caro 2020. This particular part says that whether the statutory auditor has resigned during the year. If the statutory auditor has resigned, a new auditor would come into picture. So if yes, whether the new auditor has taken into account the consideration of objections, issues and concerns raised by the outgoing auditor. So in order to understand the objections, issues and concerns, the outgoing auditor, from the outgoing auditor, the new auditor has to communicate with the outgoing auditor. Yeah, that is something that has been made mandatory by mention in the clause 18. This is not something new because it was already there as a part of auditor's responsibilities and duties in section 143, but it is again specified in Caro 2020 in increasing the significance or ensuring that it is done properly. Next clause is clause 19. Clause 19 talks about the financial position. The example that you can take up here is with regard to DHFL. Now with regard to DHFL, if you can understand, the prices went terribly down. I am in fact one of those investors who lost my money in DHFL. So what happened with DHFL is DHFL couldn't pay all the commercial, couldn't honor the commercial papers, couldn't pay the money in time, whatever it was due. So regarding this, now even auditor is responsible. Now as an auditor, assume that I was an auditor of DHFL or any such company. On the balance sheet date, if there is any liabilities, I have to comment saying that when this liability becomes due, or when this liability becomes due for payment, will the company be able to pay? Is there any material uncertainty of non-payment? I need to comment upon that. I repeat, me being the statutory auditor of a company, if the company has liabilities outstanding on the balance sheet date, as a part of clause 19, statutory auditor should comment whether the company has material certainty in repayment of such liabilities along with interest when it is due. It's a very big ask, Now, how would I comment upon that? How can I tell whether the company will be able to pay it or not? I can tell this based on the aging schedule, based on the financial ratios of the company, based on the financial statements, financial position and financial performance of the company, and my understanding about the company's policies, board and management plans. I'll repeat, amazing point. So the auditor's opinion on material uncertainty of meeting liabilities existing on the balance sheet date when they fall due. It is to be committed upon. This can be based on the financial ratios, based on the aging schedule, based on the financial statements and the auditor's knowledge of the board and the management. When we talk about the aging schedule, we're talking about the financial assets and financial assets realizing the money to pay the financial liabilities. Not aging schedule of fixed assets, not aging schedule of our inventory and everything. This is regarding the financial assets and financial liabilities. DHFL is an amazing case to understand this. After the outbreak of DHFL's case, this particular clause would have been added in CARO. That's my belief. Let's quickly go to clause 20. Clause 20 talks about CSR compliance. This is regarding unspent CSR money. So whenever there is unspent CSR money, if it relates to an other than ongoing project, it should be transferred to fund. If it is relating to an ongoing project, it should be transferred to a special account. This is given under section 135 and section 135 subsection 5 and section 135 subsection 6 of Companies Act. These two clauses have come newly into picture by Companies Amendment Act 2019. Let's go to the last clause, clause 21. Feel a little nostalgic because we've covered this in part 1 of our video as well. So whenever a consolidated financial statements are supposed to be prepared, as an auditor of the holding company, I need to check whether my subsidiary company's CARO has any qualifications or adverse remarks. If it is there, I need to comment upon that in my consolidated CARO also. If not, no. Let's see this. So is there any qualification or adverse remark in the CARO report of subsidiary? If the answer is yes, then qualification or adverse comment should be included in my CARO of the consolidated financial statements, and including the name of that particular company and paragraph number in the CARO of that subsidiary, because I might have more than one subsidiary. If the answer is no, then you can just chill. And this is the clause by clause analysis of all 21 clauses of CARO 2020. And as told in the first part of the video, here I am helping you people as to how to remember the 21 clauses in our CARO 2020. There is a pills by name DC, which was subjected to be used for fraud activities by NRIs and NRs, which were basically calculated and caught. So the thumb rule, or what do you say, the acronym basically goes like pills, PILS, DC was subjected to be used for fraud by NRIs and NRs, which was calculated and caught, CALC and then C. With respect to implication of CARO 2020 in the practical approach, we need to redraft our questionnaire regarding CARO 2020, which is quite different from CARO 2016. It's going to be very detailed. Once we have the questionnaire ready, we need to prepare a checklist which covers every aspect in every clause. Once the questionnaire and the checklist is ready, we need to ask these questions to the management and then obtain written representations, and then we need to maintain the proper working papers regarding this entire process of questionnaire, checklist and written representation received from the management to ensure that our CARO 20 is completely in compliance and we have complete hold on the same.